Maya Collins pulled her heavy backpack from the bus and looked up at the wooden sign that read Mountain View Hostel. The old bus coughed black smoke as it drove away, leaving her alone on the gravel road. She was deep in the Canadian Rockies, now far from any city or town. The nearest gas station was 50 miles back down the winding mountain road. The hostel sat in a small valley, surrounded by thick pine trees. Snow covered the mountain peaks even though it was late summer. Maya had found this place online while looking for somewhere quiet to write her travel blog. She needed photos of untouched wilderness and stories that would make her readers want to pack their bags and explore. A man with gray hair and a thick beard came out of the main building. He wore flannel and boots that had seen many years of mountain living. "You must be Maya," he said with a smile. "I'm Pete Williams. Welcome to my little piece of paradise." Maya followed Pete inside. The hostel felt warm and cozy. A stone fireplace crackled in the corner of the common room. Wooden tables and chairs filled the space. The walls were covered with old hiking maps and photos of people who had stayed there over the years. "We keep things simple here," Pete explained as he handed her a key. "No Wi-Fi in the rooms, but there's a computer in the office if you need internet. Breakfast is at 7, dinner at 6. Most folks spend their days hiking or just sitting by the fire reading." Maya's room was small but clean. She had a narrow bed, a wooden desk, and a window that looked out at the forest. She could hear a stream running somewhere nearby. After 3 months of crowded hostels in busy cities, the quiet felt strange. She unpacked her camera and laptop, then went back to the common room. A few other guests sat around the fireplace. There was an older woman reading a thick book, 2 college-age guys planning tomorrow's hike with a map spread between them, and a man sitting alone at a corner table. The man in the corner caught her attention. He looked to be in his early 30s with short brown hair and a face that seemed weathered by sun and wind. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans that had seen better days. His hiking boots were scuffed and worn, the kind that had walked many miles. He was reading a paperback book and eating soup, but something about him seemed different from the typical backpacker. Maya had met hundreds of travelers in the past year. They usually fell into easy categories. There were the party kids looking for the next adventure, the soul searchers trying to find themselves, the retirees finally taking the trips they had always dreamed about, and the serious hikers who could talk for hours about gear and trails. This man didn't fit any of those types. He sat perfectly straight in his chair, and his eyes moved around the room every few minutes, as if he was watching for something. When Pete brought him more bread, he said, "Thank you," in a quiet voice that was polite but distant. "Who's the guy in the corner?" Maya asked Pete when he came to refill her coffee. "That's Jake Morrison," Pete said, keeping his voice low. "Been here about 3 weeks now. Pays cash, keeps to himself. Goes out hiking every day from sunrise to sunset. Never asks for trail recommendations or talks about where he's been. Quiet as they come." Maya looked at Jake again, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug, and she noticed old scars across his knuckles. Not the kind of scars you get from normal accidents, but the kind that come from fighting. His fingers were long and steady, and when he turned the pages of his book, his movements were careful and controlled. Over dinner, the other guests shared stories about their travels. The college guys, Tony and Brad, were from Ohio and planned to hike the Continental Divide Trail. The older woman, Ruth, was a retired teacher from Vancouver who came to the mountains every summer to paint watercolors. Jake listened to their conversations, but never joined in. When Ruth asked if he was hiking any particular trail, he just said, "I'm exploring the area." When Tony asked about his gear recommendations, Jake gave a short answer about the importance of good boots and changed the subject. Maya found herself watching him during the meal. He ate slowly and methodically, finishing everything on his plate. When someone made a joke, he would smile slightly, but never laughed out loud. His eyes constantly moved around the room, taking in details that other people miss. After dinner, most guests moved to the fireplace to play cards or read. Jake excused himself and went outside. Maya positioned herself by the window and watched him walk across the yard to a spot near the tree line. He stood there for several minutes, completely still, looking up at the darkening sky dot. When he came back inside, he went straight to his room without saying good night to anyone. Maya spent the evening writing in her blog about the peaceful mountain setting and the interesting mix of people she had met. But she found herself thinking about Jake Morrison more than the others. Something about him didn't add up. His gear was basic, but it was all high quality and well maintained. His clothes were simple, but they fit him like someone who knew exactly what he needed for any situation. Most backpackers carried too much stuff or not enough. They either overpacked with gadgets they never used or underpacked and had to borrow things from other travelers. Jake seemed to have exactly what he needed and nothing more. The next morning at breakfast, Maya tried to sit near Jake's table. He was studying a topographical map while eating scrambled eggs and toast. The map showed the local area in great detail, with elevation lines and terrain features marked clearly. But what caught Maya's attention were the small pencil marks he had made on the map. They weren't random hiking routes. They looked more like a search pattern or surveillance grid. When Jake noticed her looking, he folded the map quickly and put it in his pocket. "Beautiful country up here," he said, which was the longest sentence she had heard him speak. "Are you doing research or something?" Maya asked. That looked like a pretty detailed map. Jake's eyes met hers for a moment, and she saw something there that made her skin prickle. It wasn't unfriendly, but it was calculating, like he was deciding how much to tell her. "Just like to know where I'm going," he said finally, then finished his breakfast and left the table. Maya watched him walk away, and she was more curious than ever about the quiet man who seemed to be much more than just another backpacker looking for adventure in the mountains. Maya woke up to strange sounds outside her window. At first, she thought it might be an animal moving through the trees, but the noise was too regular, too purposeful. She checked her phone. It was 3 a.m. She rolled out of bed and crept to the window, being careful not to make the old floorboards creak. The moon was almost full, casting silver light across the yard and forest. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then a shadow moved near the edge of the trees. It was Jake Morrison, standing perfectly, still about 50 feet from the hostel. He held something in his hands that definitely wasn't a regular cell phone. The device was larger and had a small antenna that extended from the top. A dim green light glowed on its surface. Maya pressed herself closer to the window, trying to see more clearly. Jake was speaking into the device, but his voice was so low she couldn't make out the words. His posture was different from how he acted during the day. He stood like a soldier reporting to a commanding officer. She could catch fragments of what he was saying. Words like Sector 7, negative contact, and maintaining position drifted through the night air. These weren't the words of a casual backpacker talking to friends. Back home, Jake moved the device away from his mouth and listened for several minutes. Whatever he was hearing made him nod twice and check his watch. Then he spoke again, using more of those clipped, military-style phrases that Maya recognized from movies and her ex-boyfriend who had served in the Marines. After about 10 minutes, Jake turned off the device and looked around the area carefully. His head moved in a slow, methodical pattern, scanning the tree line and the hostel building. For a moment, Maya was afraid he might see her watching from the window, but he turned and walked back toward the hostel. Maya quickly moved away from the window and got back into bed. She heard the front door open and close quietly, then footsteps in the hallway. Jake's room was 2 doors down from hers, and she listened as he moved around inside. It sounded like he was doing something with equipment, not just getting ready for bed. She lay awake for another hour, thinking about what she had seen. The device Jake was using looked like military communication equipment. His way of speaking suggested he was reporting to someone with authority, and his careful scanning of the area showed training that went far beyond normal hiking skills. The next morning at breakfast, Maya watched Jake more carefully than before. He seemed tired, with dark circles under his eyes. But more than that, he seemed tense. He kept checking his watch and looking toward the windows that faced the forest. Pete was cooking eggs and bacon at the stove when the old radio in the corner started playing the morning news. Usually, the guests ignored the radio, but today something in the newsreader's voice made everyone stop talking. Air traffic controllers in Toronto are reporting unusual radar contacts, the voice said. Several unidentified aircraft have appeared on radar screens over the past 12 hours. The objects appear to be moving at speeds and in patterns that don't match any known aircraft. Tony looked up from his map. Probably just military exercises. He said, they do training flights in remote areas all the time. The news continued. Similar reports are coming from air traffic control centers in Vancouver, Seattle, and Denver. Officials say the objects don't respond to radio contact and disappear from radar as suddenly as they appear. Maya glanced at Jake, while everyone else looked curious or mildly concerned. Jake's expression was completely neutral. He continued eating his eggs as if the news meant nothing to him. But Maya noticed his left hand was clenched into a fist on the table. That's weird, Ruth said, putting down her coffee cup. All those cities are pretty far apart. What kind of military exercise will cover that much territory? Maybe it's not military, Brad suggested with a grin. Maybe it's aliens. Everyone laughed except Jake. He stood up from the table and excused himself, saying he wanted to get an early start on his hike. Maya waited 15 minutes, then told Pete she was going to take some photos around the hostel grounds. She walked outside and looked for signs of where Jake might have gone. His footprints in the soft dirt led toward the forest, but not on any of the marked hiking trails. She followed the prints for about a quarter-mile until they reached a small clearing. Jake was there, kneeling beside a large pine tree. He had his strange communication device out again, along with what looked like a laptop computer connected to a small satellite dish. Maya hid behind a thick tree and watched. Jake was typing rapidly on the laptop while speaking quietly into his radio. She was too far away to hear most of what he said, but she caught a few words: confirmed sightings, pattern analysis, and request instructions. After about 20 minutes, Jake packed up his equipment and started walking deeper into the forest. Maya waited until he was out of sight, then hurried back to the hostel. She found Pete in the kitchen, cleaning up from breakfast. Pete, she said, trying to sound casual, how long did you say Jake has been staying here? About 3 weeks, Pete replied, scrubbing a pan. Why do you ask? Just curious. Has he ever mentioned what he does for work? Pete shrugged. Never asked, and he never volunteered the information. Some guests like to talk about their lives. Others prefer to keep things private. Jake's definitely the private type. Maya nodded, but her mind was racing. 3 weeks was a long time for a casual backpacker to stay in one place, especially someone who seemed to have plenty of money for extended travel. Most budget travelers moved on after a few days to save money. That afternoon, the radio brought more news about the mysterious aircraft. Reports were now coming from cities across North America and Europe. Government officials were calling it a technical malfunction affecting radar systems worldwide. But pilots were starting to report visual sightings of strange objects in the sky. Maya noticed that each time the news mentioned another city, Jake would check his watch and make a note in a small notebook. When she tried to see what he was writing, he would close the notebook and put it away. By evening, the mood in the hostel had changed. The strange news reports had everyone talking and speculating. Some guests thought it was a hoax, others believed it might be secret government testing, and a few wondered if something more serious was happening. Jake ate dinner quickly and excused himself early again. Maya watched from her window as he walked out to the same spot near the trees where she had seen him the night before. This time, his conversation on the radio lasted much longer. Maya could see him pacing back and forth, and his body language suggested he was receiving important information. When he finally came back inside, his face was grim and focused. Maya realized that whatever was happening with the mysterious aircraft, Jake Morrison knew more about it than he was letting on. The quiet backpacker was definitely not what he seemed, and the timing of his presence at this remote hostel was starting to look like much more than a coincidence. Maya was drinking her morning coffee and reading when the first scream came from outside. Ruth dropped her watercolor brushes and ran to the window. Tony and Brad jumped up from their card game. Even Pete came rushing out from the kitchen. What the hell is that? Tony pointed at the sky above the tree line. 3 objects hung in the air about 100 feet above the forest. They were unlike anything Maya had ever seen. Each craft was shaped like a teardrop made of polished metal that seemed to shift colors in the morning light. They made no sound at all, just floating there as if the laws of physics didn't apply to them. Are those helicopters? Brad asked, but his voice shook because he knew they weren't. The objects were perfectly still for about 30 seconds. Then they began moving in ways that made Maya's stomach turn. They slid sideways through the air, rotated without changing direction, and moved up and down as if they were swimming through invisible water. Ruth started crying. Tony was taking pictures with his phone, but his hands were shaking so badly the images would be worthless. Pete stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth hanging open. Everyone inside. Now! The voice was sharp and commanding. Maya turned to see Jake Morrison striding across the common room. Gone was the quiet, hesitant backpacker. This man moved with purpose and authority that made everyone stop what they were doing. I said everyone inside, away from the windows. Jake repeated. His voice carried the kind of command that made people obey without thinking. Do not use any electronic devices. Do not try to take pictures or videos. Do not attempt to signal or communicate with those craft. Who are you to tell us what to do? Tony demanded, but he was already backing away from the window. Jake ignored the question. He was pulling equipment from his backpack that definitely hadn't been there before. Maya watched in amazement as he assembled what looked like a small radar dish and connected it to a device covered in blinking lights. How did you know this was going to happen? Maya asked. Jake looked at her for a moment, and she saw him make a decision. Because I've been waiting for it, he said simply. He activated something that looked like a signal jammer, and immediately all the cell phones in the room went dead. The radio went silent. Even Pete's old landline phone stopped working. What did you do? Ruth asked, her voice high with panic. I'm protecting you, Jake said. He was scanning frequencies on a device that looked more advanced than anything Maya had seen outside of science fiction movies. Those craft can track electronic signals. Right now, they think this building is empty of technology. Outside, the 3 objects were descending slowly toward the valley floor. As they got closer, Maya could see that they were much larger than she had first thought. Each one was probably the size of a city bus, but they moved with the grace of hummingbirds. Jake, Pete said quietly, I think you better tell us what's going on. Jake was adjusting dials on his equipment while watching readouts on multiple screens. Those are reconnaissance scouts, he said without looking up. They belong to a species we call the ethereals. They've been watching Earth for about 8 months. We? Maya asked. Who's we? Before Jake could answer, the first craft touched down in the clearing visible through the back windows. A section of its hull opened like flower petals, and something stepped out. Maya had to grip the back of a chair to keep from falling down. The being was tall and thin, probably 7 feet high, with pale skin that seemed to glow slightly. It wore no clothes that she could see, but its body was covered in patterns that might have been tattoos or might have been natural markings. Its head was larger than a human's, and its eyes were completely black. Don't look directly at them for too long, Jake warned. Some people have severe reactions to extended eye contact. 2 more beings emerged from the craft. They moved in a way that reminded of dancers, flowing and graceful. Each carried a device that pulsed with soft blue light. They're scanning the area, Jake explained. Looking for life signs, technology, anything that might be a threat. A threat? Brad's voice cracked. We're the threat. Look at them. The second and third craft landed on either side of the first one. More beings emerged, bringing the total to about a dozen. They spread out in a careful pattern, each taking a position that gave them a clear view of a different section of the valley. Jake's equipment started beeping rapidly. They're activating some kind of communication system, he said. Everyone stay calm. This is important. A voice filled the air around the hostel. It didn't come from any speaker Maya could see. Instead, it seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the air itself was talking. Inhabitants of this structure, the voice said. It spoke perfect English, but with an odd rhythm that made it sound almost musical. We mean no harm to your species. We are here to conduct an evaluation. Evaluation of what? Pete whispered. Jake held up a hand for silence. He was listening to something on his headphones while watching his screens. Your species has reached a level of development that requires assessment, the voice continued. We will observe your behavior under controlled conditions. Those who prove worthy will be welcomed into the galactic community. Those who do not will receive guidance until they improve. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Guidance didn't sound good. What happens if we don't want to be evaluated? Tony called out. The voice was silent for a long moment. Participation is not optional, it finally said. Jake stood up from his equipment and looked around the room at the frightened faces. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Jake Morrison, he said. I'm commanding officer of a unit called the Terran Defense Initiative. My mission was to monitor this area and respond to potential first contact scenarios. First contact? Ruth asked weakly. Contact with alien species, Jake explained. We've known they were coming. The hostel was perfect cover for an observation. Post, remote location, changing population of guests, good sight lines of the surrounding area. Maya stared at him. You've been spying on us? I've been protecting you, Jake corrected. And right now, that protection is more important than ever. Outside, the beings had finished their initial survey and were moving toward the hostel. They walked in formation, like soldiers, but with an eerie grace that made Maya's skin crawl. What do they want from us? She asked. Jake was putting on what looked like body armor that had been hidden in his pack. They want to test us, he said. The ethereals believe that a species' true nature is revealed when they're under pressure. They're going to put us in situations designed to see how we react. What kind of situations? Pete asked. Jake checked his weapons and communication gear. The kind that show whether we're worth keeping alive, he said grimly. The beings were at the door now. Maya could hear them moving around the building, their footsteps making no sound on the wooden porch. Remember, Jake said quietly, stay calm, work together, and follow my lead. These tests are designed to reveal character, show them the best of what humanity can be. The front door opened without anyone touching it, as if the lock had simply decided to stop working. The first ethereal stepped inside, its black eyes scanning the room with inhuman intelligence. The evaluation begins now, it said. The ethereal that entered the hostel was even more frightening up close. Its skin looked like polished marble, and when it moved, Maya could see muscles that seemed to flow like water beneath the surface. Its black eyes fixed on each person in the room for several seconds before moving to the next. You will participate in a series of scenarios, the being said. Its voice still came from everywhere at once, making it impossible to tell if its mouth was actually moving. These scenarios will reveal your species' capacity for cooperation, sacrifice, and moral reasoning. Jake stepped forward, positioning himself between the alien and the other guests. What exactly does this test involve? He asked. The ethereal's head tilted slightly, like a bird studying an interesting insect. Your world will experience simulated catastrophic events. Your responses will be monitored and evaluated. Species that demonstrate worthiness will be invited to join the Galactic Federation. Those that fail will be guided toward improvement. And if we refuse to participate, Jake's hand rested near a device on his belt. Refusal indicates unworthiness, the ethereal replied simply. Maya watched Jake's face carefully. She could see him thinking, calculating options and risks. When he spoke again, his voice was calm and professional. I understand. What's the first scenario? The ethereal raised one long and suddenly the air around them shimmered. Maya blinked, and when her vision cleared, she wasn't in the hostel anymore. They were standing in what looked like a subway station, but one unlike any Maya had ever seen. The walls were made of the same metallic material as the alien craft, and they pulsed with soft light. About 50 people stood on the platform with them, all looking confused and scared. This is a simulation, Jake said quietly to the group. It feels real, but remember that it's a test. Stay together and think before you act. A voice echoed through the station, but this time it sounded like a human announcer. Attention passengers. Due to system failure, this station is flooding. The water level will reach dangerous heights in 15 minutes. There is one escape pod that can hold 20 people. Choose wisely. Maya looked around and saw that water was indeed beginning to seep through cracks in the walls. The other people on the platform were starting to panic. Some were pushing toward what must be the escape pod. Others were looking for alternative exits. 50 people, one pod that holds 20, Pete said grimly. They want to see who we choose to save. Jake was studying the situation carefully. There's always another way, he said. These tests are designed to make us think we have limited options, but humans are good at finding alternatives. He walked over to one of the walls and began examining it closely. Maya followed him and watched as he ran his hands along the surface. Looking for something. Jake, what are you doing? She asked. Looking for the rules of their simulation, he replied. Every program has limitations. If this is designed to test our problem-solving skills, there should be a way to save everyone. Meanwhile, the water was rising faster. It was already ankle-deep, and people were becoming more desperate. A fight broke out near the escape pod as two groups tried to claim it for their families. Ruth grabbed Maya's arm. Shouldn't we try to get to the pod? There might not be room if we wait. Maya looked at Jake, who was still examining the walls. He said there's another way. I trust him. Tony and Brad had joined the crowd around the escape pod, but they weren't fighting. Instead, they were trying to organize people into groups based on families and ages. Maya felt proud of them for thinking about others even in a crisis. Found it, Jake said suddenly. He pressed his hand against a section of wall that looked identical to every other section. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a maintenance tunnel. This tunnel should lead to another exit, Jake called out to everyone. We can evacuate through here, but not everyone listened. About half the people were so focused on the escape pod that they ignored Jake's discovery. The other half began moving toward the tunnel. We have to help them, Maya said, pointing to the people still fighting over the pod. Jake nodded. Ruth, you're good with people. Can you try to convince them? Maya, help me clear debris from the tunnel entrance. Tony, Brad, start moving people through in groups. For the next few minutes, they worked as a team. Ruth used her teacher voice to get people's attention and explain about the tunnel. Maya and Jake cleared rocks and metal that were blocking the passage. Tony and Brad organized an orderly evacuation, making sure children and elderly people went first. Some people still refused to leave the escape pod area, convinced it was their only chance. But by the time the water reached waist level, they had evacuated 38 people through the tunnel. Only 12 people remained on the platform, and they finally managed to squeeze into the escape pod together. The simulation ended abruptly. Maya blinked and found herself back in the hostel common room. The ethereal was watching them with those unreadable black eyes. Interesting, it said. Most species focus entirely on the obvious solution. Your group found an alternative and worked to save additional individuals. Jake stepped forward again. Is that what you were testing? Our ability to think beyond the obvious choices? Partially, the ethereal replied. We were also observing your leadership structure, your willingness to help strangers, and your ability to function under pressure. Maya felt a surge of pride. They had worked well together, and they had saved more people than the test seemed designed to allow. But the ethereal wasn't finished. The next scenario will be more challenging. Your performance in this test has earned you the right to continue. But failure in subsequent tests will result in immediate termination of the evaluation. What does that mean exactly? Pete asked. The ethereal's head tilted again. It means your species will be classified as unsuitable for independence. Corrective measures will be implemented. Jake's jaw tightened. And what do these corrective measures involve? Supervised development under ethereal guidance. Your technological advancement will be limited. Your population will be controlled. And your expansion beyond this planet will be prevented until you prove worthy of autonomy. Maya felt sick. They were talking about the enslavement of the entire human race, presented in polite clinical terms. How many tests are there? Jake asked. 3 scenarios total. You have completed 1 successfully. The remaining tests will evaluate your response to resource scarcity and your handling of moral dilemmas that require sacrifice. The room shimmered again, and Maya braced herself for whatever came next. But this time, instead of being transported to another simulation, she found herself looking at what appeared to be a holographic display showing locations around the world. The second scenario is beginning globally, the ethereal announced. Your species is facing a simulated pandemic. Medical resources are limited. You must decide how to distribute treatment fairly while maintaining social order. Maya watched in horror as the display showed cities around the world begin to react to news of the simulated crisis. Real people were making real decisions based on fake information, not knowing they were part of an alien test. This isn't just about us anymore, she whispered to Jake. He nodded grimly. They're testing all of humanity at once. What we do here represents our entire species. The weight of responsibility settled on Maya's shoulders like a heavy blanket. Everything they did from this point forward would help determine whether humanity remained free or spent the rest of its existence under alien control. Maya watched the holographic display with growing dread as cities around the world began responding to the fake pandemic. In New York, people were rushing to hospitals. In London, the government was calling emergency meetings. In Tokyo, scientists were working frantically to develop treatments for a disease that didn't actually exist. They don't know it's a test, she said to Jake. Real people are making real decisions based on false information. Jake was working at his equipment again, but this time he wasn't trying to hide what he was doing. His fingers moved quickly across a keyboard that looked far more advanced than anything Maya had seen before. Multiple screens showed data streams, maps, and communication channels. That's the point, Jake said without looking up. The ethereals want to see how we react under real pressure with real consequences. But they made one mistake. What mistake? Pete asked. Jake smiled grimly. They assumed we weren't ready for them. He pressed several buttons, and suddenly his communication equipment came alive with voices. Maya could hear people speaking in different languages, all using the same military-style phrases she had heard Jake use during his nighttime radio calls. All. TDI units, this is Morrison, Jake spoke into his headset. Operation Looking Glass is now active. Execute Protocol 7 immediately. TDI units? Maya asked. Terran Defense Initiative, Jake explained while continuing to work. We've been preparing for exactly this scenario for 15 years. What the ethereals think is their test is actually our first real field operation. On the holographic display, something strange began happening. In several major cities, the panic was beginning to organize into efficient response patterns. Medical teams were deploying with equipment that looked more advanced than standard hospital gear. Government officials were making decisions that seemed perfectly coordinated. Across different countries, the ethereal that had been watching them suddenly became more alert. It moved closer to Jake's equipment, its black eyes fixed on the screens. Your species demonstrates unusual preparation, it said. This level of coordination should not be possible without prior knowledge of the scenario. Jake looked up from his work and met the alien's gaze directly. You're right. We did have prior knowledge. We've been watching you watch us for the past 8 months. Maya felt her jaw drop. What? The first ethereal scout ship was detected and captured in October. Jake continued, still typing commands. We've been studying their technology and preparing countermeasures ever since. This test was exactly what we expected them to try. On the display, Maya could see that the global response to the fake pandemic was becoming incredibly efficient. Medical supplies were being distributed in patterns that minimized waste. Governments were sharing information and resources in ways that normally took months of negotiation. Social order was being maintained through community cooperation rather than authoritarian control. How is this possible? Ruth asked, staring at the screens. Jake activated another communication channel. Maya, remember when you asked what I did for work? I'm a xenopsychologist. I study alien behavior patterns. The TDI has been analyzing ethereal testing methods for months. We know exactly how they evaluate species. He pointed to the display showing the global response. They test for 3 things: problem-solving ability, social cooperation, and moral reasoning under pressure. But they expect primitive, uncoordinated responses. They've never encountered a species that was actively preparing for their evaluation. The ethereal was now examining Jake's equipment more closely. This technology incorporates design elements from our systems, it said, and for the first time, its voice carried a note of surprise. Of course it does, Jake replied. We reverse engineered it from the scout ship we captured. Took our best scientists about 6 months to figure out how your communication networks function. Maya was beginning to understand the scope of what Jake was revealing. You mean humanity has been preparing for this specific test? Not just preparing, Jake said. We've been running practice scenarios for months. Every major city has TDI coordination teams. Every hospital has protocols for resource distribution during artificial scarcity events. Every government has plans for international cooperation during simulated crises. He gestured to the other hostile guests. Even civilians have been prepared. Ruth, what did you do before you retired? I was a teacher, Ruth answered, confused. And during the subway scenario, what was your instinct? Ruth thought for a moment. To help organize people and get them to safety. Exactly. Pete, what did you focus on? Making sure everyone had what they needed, Pete replied. And Tony and Brad? We tried to help the families and older people first, Tony said. Jake nodded. You all demonstrated exactly the kind of responses that indicate a mature, cooperative species, but that wasn't luck or natural human goodness. It was the result of 15 years of subtle social programs designed to encourage those exact behaviors. Maya stared at him. You're saying our entire society has been secretly trained to pass alien tests? I'm saying we identified the criteria for survival in a universe full of advanced species, and we've been working to meet those criteria, Jake corrected. The TDI doesn't just monitor for alien contact. We also work to make sure humanity is ready for it when it happens. On the display, the global response to the pandemic scenario was nearing completion. The fake disease had been contained through international cooperation. Medical resources had been distributed fairly and efficiently. Social order had been maintained through community support rather than authoritarian control. Most impressive of all, scientists in different countries had collaborated to develop a treatment in record time. The ethereal moved away from Jake's equipment and stood in the center of the room. For the first time since Maya had seen it, the alien seemed uncertain. Your species' performance exceeds expected parameters, it said. This level of coordination suggests advanced preparation for our evaluation protocols. It does, Jake agreed. Because we've been preparing. The question is, what does that tell you about humanity? The ethereal was silent for a long moment. It suggests intelligence, foresight, and the ability to work toward long-term goals. These are admirable qualities. It also suggests that we're not as primitive as you assumed, Jake added. We detected your initial surveys. We captured your technology. We figured out your testing methods. And we prepared our entire species to demonstrate our worthiness. Maya felt a surge of pride and amazement. Humanity hadn't just stumbled through the alien tests. They had known it was coming and had spent months preparing for it. But the most important thing, Jake continued, is that we didn't prepare by developing better weapons or building defenses. We prepared by making ourselves better people. Better at cooperation, better at solving problems, better at helping each other. The ethereal's black eyes seemed to focus more intently on Jake. You suggest that your species chose to improve its moral character in order to pass our evaluation. I'm suggesting that we recognize the kind of species that deserves to survive in a universe full of advanced civilizations, Jake replied. And we decided to become that kind of species. The alien stood perfectly still for several minutes. Maya could almost see it processing this information and trying to decide what it meant for the evaluation. Finally, it spoke. The third and final test will proceed as planned. But your performance thus far has been ... unexpected. Jake returned to his equipment. We're ready for whatever comes next, he said confidently. But Maya noticed that his hands were shaking slightly as he worked. Whatever the final test involved, even Jake wasn't entirely sure they were prepared for it. The ethereal raised its arm again, and Maya braced herself for another simulation. But instead of being transported somewhere else, she heard a new sound outside the hostel. It was the deep thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the mountain. Air, right on schedule, Jake said, checking his watch. He spoke into his radio headset. Eagle 1, this is Morrison. The package is ready for pickup. Maya stared at him. What package? The ethereal also seemed confused. It moved to the window and looked out at the approaching aircraft. This helicopter was not part of the scenario design, it said. No, Jake agreed. It wasn't. The helicopter landed in the clearing where the ethereal craft had touched down earlier. It was military black with no visible markings, but Maya could see it was much more advanced than any helicopter she had seen before. The rotor blades made almost no noise, and the craft seemed to hover with impossible stability. Two figures in military uniforms got out of the helicopter and walked toward the hostel. As they got closer, Maya could see that one was a woman with short gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in command positions. That's General Lisa Brooks, Jake said, commander of the Earth Defense Corps. Earth Defense Corps? Pete asked weakly. The general entered the hostel with her companion, a younger man carrying what looked like advanced communication equipment. She nodded to Jake, then looked directly at the ethereal. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison has done excellent work, she said to the alien. But I think it's time we discuss the real situation. The ethereal's head tilted in that bird-like way Maya hadn't noticed before. What real situation? General Brooks smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. The situation where you're not actually an ethereal, and this isn't actually a first contact scenario. Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. What? The real ethereals attempted to infiltrate Earth 7 months ago. General Brooks explained, keeping her eyes on the being in front of her. We detected their scout ships and captured them before they could complete their mission. What we learned from interrogating the actual ethereals was very interesting. She gestured to the being that had been conducting the tests. We learned that they don't conduct evaluations like this. They don't give other species chances to prove themselves. They simply invade and take what they want. The being that had been calling itself an ethereal suddenly straightened up. Its movements became more human-like, And when it spoke, its voice no longer came from everywhere at once. "How long have you known?" it asked, and now it sounded like a normal human voice. "Since about 15 minutes after you landed," Jake replied. Real ethereal technology produces a specific electromagnetic signature. Your craft are using human-built systems disguised to look alien. Maya's head was spinning. "You're saying that's not an alien?" General Brooks reached up and touched something on the being's neck. Suddenly the tall, pale figure shimmered and changed. Where the ethereal had been standing, there was now a human man in his 40s wearing an advanced suit that was covered in projectors and sensors. "This is Captain Stephen Walsh," General Brooks said. "He's been working with the TDI's Psychological Operations Division to develop training scenarios for civilian populations." Maya looked around the room at the other guests. Ruth was staring in shock. Tony and Brad looked like they couldn't decide whether to be relieved or angry. Pete was just shaking his head. "So none of this was real?" Maya asked. "The training was." "Real," Jake said. "The threats we're preparing for are real. The technology we've developed is real. But this specific scenario was designed to test our civilian preparedness programs." General Brooks activated the device, and suddenly the holographic display showing the global pandemic response changed. Instead of showing real cities responding to a fake crisis, they now showed data about the training exercise. "We've been running similar scenarios in locations around the world," she explained, "testing how well ordinary civilians work with military personnel during crisis situations, testing whether our social conditioning programs have been effective, testing whether people can maintain cooperation and moral reasoning under pressure." Maya felt a mix of relief and anger. "You mean we were the ones being tested, not humanity as a whole?" "You were testing representatives of humanity," Jake corrected. "The TDI needs to know that when real first contact happens, civilians will be able to work with our forces effectively. Today's exercise proved that our preparation programs are working." Captain Walsh, who had been the fake ethereal, removed more of his disguise equipment. "Your responses were exactly what we hoped to see," he said. "Cooperation, creative problem-solving, willingness to help strangers, and trust in military leadership when the situation required it." "But what about the real ethereals?" Ruth asked. "You said they were actually hostile." General Brooks nodded grimly. "The real ethereals are a species that conquers other worlds by overwhelming them with superior technology. They don't believe in cooperation or giving other species chances to prove themselves. When they arrive, they attack immediately." She walked to the window and looked out at the valley. "But they made a mistake when they sent those scout ships. They assumed we were a primitive species that wouldn't detect them. Instead, we captured their technology, learned their language, and discovered their invasion plans." Jake joined her at the window. "The real invasion is coming," he said to Maya. "Based on what we learned from the captured ethereals, we have about 6 months before their main fleet arrives." Maya felt cold. 6 months? 6 months to finish preparing Earth's defenses, General Brooks confirmed. 6 months to complete the training of civilian populations. 6 months to get ready for a war that most people don't even know is coming. She turned back to the group. "That's why exercises like this one are so important. When the real invasion begins, we'll need every human being to work together. Military and civilian, young and old, every nation and every community." Maya looked around the room at the people she had spent the past few days with. Ordinary travelers who had just proven they could work together, solve problems, and maintain their humanity under pressure. "So what happens now?" she asked. General Brooks smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. "Now we offer you a choice. You can return to your normal lives with your memories of this exercise modified for security reasons, or you can join us in preparing Earth for the real threat that's coming." Maya thought about her travel blog, her plans to see more of the world, her quiet life writing about interesting places and interesting people. Then she thought about the real aliens that were coming, the ones that wouldn't give humanity a chance to prove itself. "If I join you," she said, "what would I be doing?" Jake answered her. "You'd be part of the civilian liaison program, helping to prepare other ordinary people for what's coming, teaching them the same cooperation and problem-solving skills you demonstrated today." Maya looked at Ruth, Tony, Brad, and Pete. She could see in their faces that they were all thinking the same thing. They had discovered they were capable of much more than they had ever imagined. "I'm in," Maya said. One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Ruth would help train older civilians. Tony and Brad would work with college-age recruits. Pete would help establish training centers in remote locations. As they walked out to the helicopter, Maya realized that her days as a simple travel blogger were over. She was about to become part of humanity's greatest adventure, preparing for a war that would determine whether the human race remained free or became slaves to beings that saw them as nothing more than primitives to be conquered. The helicopter lifted off, carrying them toward a future that would test everything humanity had learned about working together, solving impossible problems, and never giving up hope even when facing overwhelming odds.